Hi, everyone. I'm Madeline DiNono, President and CEO of the Geena Davis Institute on Gender and Media. With me is our esteemed ASL interpreter, Andrea Lust. Please remember to pin Andrea's video if you would like to keep her on screen throughout the event, and closed captioning is also available at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that in Los Angeles, we are currently on the traditional lands of the Chumash peoples. I want to recognize that we are all connected with one another and that the ground beneath my feet is historically the home of Indigenous peoples. We want to thank our wonderful partners at Sony Pictures Classics for inviting us to promote the upcoming release of Mothering Sunday, opening exclusively in theaters in Los Angeles and New York City on March 25th. And we are super excited to have the film's director, Eva Husson, and the star, Odessa Young, with us today. So let's get started. Hello, hello,
hello. Hello. Thanks for having us.
It's such a joy. It's such a joy. Such a moving film. So Eva, how did you kind of wrap your head around taking this material and the transformation to the screen, and there's some things that to me were intentional. There's many ways to tell a story, right? And as a director, you've got to pick how you're going to tell that story, but the way that you chose to navigate in the future, you know, in the past, in the middle, was an orchestra of its own. And so if you can talk a little bit about your thinking in terms of how you were going to put the story together, I think that would be really interesting for our audience.
Well, thanks for acknowledging the massive amount of work that went into it, because I can tell you it was not easy. And there was more than one time when I was on the floor with my editor, just like staring at the ceiling saying, we'll never get there, you know. It was a 7 months, work process in the edit of just, first like to follow the rails of the screenplay, and then you always hit this wall when, you know, it worked wonderfully. It may have worked wonderfully on the page, but like you need to reassess and understand what doesn't work as a continuum, because, you know, it's moving images and it's a sensation of time. And I think on that level, my editor and I, we both like quite good at making connections, whether they are visual, auditive, you know, thematical. I think it's very playful for the two of us. So we sort of get into this dance of like trying to connect things and trying to understand how much of it needs to be told at that moment of the story, because that's something that we understood very early on. It was much more postmodern at the very beginning, in the sense that it was much more fragmented, but then you lacked a few emotional beats that were extremely necessary to get engaged with some of the tragedies that the character of Jane goes through. And so we had to dance, you know, carefully between giving enough to be charged emotionally and fragmenting the narrative so that you would get a sense of what, how, and what memory is. And I think it was a trial and error thing. And you know, I joke somewhere that I watched the film 200 times, but, you know, it might have been true in the sense that you could not really judge of the effect of a piece if you didn't see the whole thing before, and like if you see how it impacted after. So there was a moment in the edit where every time we moved one thing, even if it was 30 seconds, we had to watch the whole film, which was, you know, sometimes slightly tedious, but I think both Emily Orsini and myself were very dedicated to the process, and, you know, I guess we're passionate about it. So at the end of the day, it was just worth it, and just worth the effort.
Absolutely worth it. And so, Odessa, I want to ask you a question, but then I want Eva to, chime in. And I want to get to some of the themes, but, what was your impression? You're getting a million scripts every day. What was your impression of the material, the script? What drove you to it? And then I would love, Eva, for you to talk about offering, and selecting, Odessa, which was just such a brilliant choice. But Odessa, what was your impression of the material and what spoke to you?
I mean, I promise I'm not getting a million scripts a day. I one a month, if I'm lucky. I it's kind of like the most simple answer. I think I thought that it was a really good screenplay. Like, it was well written. I felt it. I really adored the characters. I could immediately find an access point into the pain and the grief and the loss. And I don't know, it's just one of those rare occurrences when you on the first read of something, it becomes part of your life already. And ultimately, that's kind of like the simplest answer I can give. I mean, I could go into like all of the reasons that I think it is so impactful, but I think that hopefully it speaks for itself. But I also had seen, when I met with Eva, I'd seen her 2 films, and I thought that they were really beautiful and really tender and sensitive. And so I could immediately kind of pair, her style with this kind of story, and it all just kind of felt really right, and like it would be, yeah, it was a no-brainer.
So Eva, tell us about Odessa.
Well, we've been searching for a Jane for a bit, and I was starting to get nervous at that stage, because I was like, I just realized that the way young actresses present themselves is oftentimes still defined by a very patriarchal male gaze vision of things. So they tend to be soft, and they tend to be, pretty and accessible. And I wanted my Jane to have much more texture and much more scope. And one of the things I really wanted to have was the idea that you could project strength and vulnerability at the same time, and that the two were not antithetical, and that it was okay to be a woman who was extremely driven, extremely incisive, and yet at the same time still owning her own emotions, which I thought that's how the character was written. And surprisingly enough, I kind of relate to that on a personal level. So, and when I saw Odessa in Shirley in front of Elizabeth Moss, I was just blown away. And because she had that, and she could, first of all, she could play in front of Elizabeth Moss and like not get swallowed up whole, which is a feat by itself. And then she has a range that I find quite extraordinary, and that's a credit to her acting abilities, because it's just not, you have very, very few actresses who have Odessa's range.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more.
Your face right now, she's like,
Thanks.
And so now I'd love for you both to talk about working together. So what I noticed is, when you are addressing pain and grief and loss, there's many ways to direct that. And even though, the British are used to being stiff upper lip kind of thing, there is a reservation, there is a suppression, there's an acquiescing of rage. And, the performance could have been much, much larger, right? But those moments, that outburst, when only behind closed door privately, Jane allows herself to experience the full range of pain and grief. So working together from a direction standpoint, how did you talk about like when you're going to hit that big moment, like when the Olivia Colman character finally explodes, right, at that lunch versus these quiet moments? How did you talk about that from a direction standpoint, from a director actor?
That's funny because I just realized throughout the process that I have a certain faith in actors, in the sense that for me, 99% of the directing decisions are made in the casting. I'm going for an actor because I sense something like a scope of where they're going to go for, and I know that I can nudge that I can help, that I can be like, the doula, like, the one that helps giving birth. And I realized, I think shortly after we started, that Odessa and we hadn't talked that much. And I had a little moment of like freaking out. I was like, I hope it goes well, and then it's just, because I think part of maybe it's not the right way to do it, but I think I do trust the actor's process, and I just try to push them. And yes, we talk, but I don't tend to overanalyze. I think it sort of breaks the like the emotion, the process, and I tend to let the actor go his direction or her direction. And if I see I need to intervene, then I step in. I mean, I don't know, you tell me, Odessa, maybe I'm not at all like this, but I feel, and sometimes also I try stuff and it's a fucking disaster, and I have to sort of like wrangle myself and backpedal without anybody noticing, or so I think, but it's a matter of trying to see what the actor or actress needs for me, and I don't like to have a method. I don't like to impose a certain tone on set. I'm a very reactive director. Am I?
Yeah. I think
And that was Odessa Young for you, ladies and gentlemen.
that's my answer. Bye. Good chat. I mean, it's weird because, like, yes, I everything that you just said, I believe is true. But I also think that our dynamic on set was quite unique because, I remember coming to you with ideas and being like, Eva, I think that this should happen, and I'm not budging. This is what I think. And Eva would be like, okay, well, I already have that written down. So in that sense, like, there wasn't actually much to talk about, because I think that both of our ideas about like what the story meant and what it needed and what this character meant, where she needed to go and how deep she needed to go, I think that all of our ideas aligned on that. I don't think that there was ever a disagreement about like
that's what I mean. That's what I mean when I'm talking about, for me, directing is 99% casting, because I tend to have that kind of experiences with actors in general. And it's kind of distressing for me when I don't, because like it's just very bizarre for me to choose somebody and then to like be completely not aligned with them. But yeah, and that was the same thing with Josh, and that was the same thing with Colin. And it's just a very and that's a part of the job that I really love for its magical power, because suddenly it's like falling in love with somebody. You don't quite know why, but you're on the same page and you sort of work your way through the moment, and it's a little bit magical.
And so, Odessa, I want to go back to you a bit. And what was it like for you? And I believe this may have been the first time where you had to age and play, the character at extreme, ages. What was that like for you, as a challenge? Because it's always cool to do something new as an actor, but what was that like for you? And how did you have to train yourself? Because I know when I trip now, I don't bounce back like I did when I was 18. It's like, let me crawl up the wall. So there's there's the mentality, the emotionality, the physicality. How did you, it's like an athlete, how did you train yourself for that?
You know, I wish that I had a more interesting answer. I didn't. And I'm not saying that I can just inherently do these things. I am not saying that at all, because I cannot. It's just that I was given a script that kind of did the work for me. And Alice Birch has taken such, you know, delicate attention to differentiate, you know, younger Jane and older Jane, to the point where, you know, Jane, I mean, young Jane doesn't like speak a lot. She's mainly just walking and looking at things, which I love about her, because you get such an insight into her perspective. And she is also a bit of a cipher, and you know, that's all very alluring and nice. But I think what is so exciting about older Jane, or even Jane when she's in her 20s and meets Donald, is that she actually, like, she gets to hold herself higher than she ever has before. She gets to actually self-actualize and own herself and have an opinion, which she's never gotten to do before. So I just think that that difference changes your body, and it changes your voice, and it changes so much of how you approach scenes. And so that's what I meant by, you know, I kind of didn't train for it, because it was as soon as I understood the foundational difference in kind of their confidences, then the rest kind of fell into place. Especially when I was playing Jane at 80, that was a real challenge. I'm kidding. It was Glenda Jackson, of course. I mean, it was.
I was like, don't give too much away. No, yeah, exactly.
Oh, I may not. No, I mean, everybody knows that she's on IMDb.
Yeah.
But I beg to differ about one thing, because I think there's one thing that makes a substantial difference between the way you play Jane at 20 something and Jane at 40 something, and it's the gaze, where, you know, when she was brought up as an orphan to be a maid, young Jane, and she doesn't look in people's eyes because she was trained not to do so. And it's a very powerful social signifier. And when she's older, she got rid of that social signifier. You know, she just really freed herself from this subordination relationship. And she has, Odessa has a very powerful stare. You know, you don't want to get caught in like a staring contest with Odessa. And so it's even more powerful, because then you see how she looks at people and how she engages, and all those little things, you know, between the makeup, the writing, the hairdos, the colors, you know, we use different colors, just all of these things. It's like an impressionistic portrait that sort of carries the character. But I did like a lot that thing that you brought with the way you looked at people.
Thanks.
Yeah, and again, you know, very, very subtle, where there could have been really large, loud, you know, but there was that quiet, which was, you know, so beautiful. So, so Eva, there's your fabulous cast, and I would love for you to talk about the energy and the connection of that, particularly with, you know, Odessa and Josh. But to me, there was another character in the movie, which was the music.
Oh, yeah.
And particularly, you know, when Odessa is having her, I'm calling it Freedom Day, right? And expressing herself with a freedom that would not be allowed, you know, ever for someone who was in that service position. The music, you know, the orchestration that accompanies her through this freedom, and how the music obviously informs the drama of the scene. But I'd love for you to talk about it, because to me, it was very significant, and not significant in a way that it took you out of it, but I felt like it was really a big supporting character.
Yeah. I'm glad you bring it up because that's a real credit to my longtime collaborator, Morgan Kibi, who, I met her when she was 17 as an actress, and I picked her again in student films that I made. And then Morgan transitioned into composing. And so basically we've been working together for 20 years. And I think there's no way the music on this film could have been that organic to the film if we hadn't had that intimate knowledge of each other, because it allowed us to explore from quite early on in the process and get really lost. Like it really took us a while to actually get the music the way we wanted it. We both wanted the music to be a character. We both, it was very challenging because the edit kept on changing and the music needed to hold scenes together. So when you don't have the scene as such until the very late in the process, it's not the traditional linear chronology, because in a linear chronology, you just refine the same linear narrative. But in this, like, it would change like length and mood. And so Morgan and I, at some point, we sort of let it go. We use temp music, which is something that I truly hate, because I'm having a really hard time projecting onto the film the actual color it has. Mm-hmm. So that made my creative process really hard. That made her creative process really hard. And it only left us 3 weeks to do the music, which means that Morgan was working between 14 to 16-hour days. And she was in LA, I was in London. I would have her on the phone. We just keep each other up and going. And she, I don't know, it was it's quite moving when you have that comfort and that trust in your collaborators, that even when you're like really lost, that somehow we're going to get back on track and finish the journey together. And that's exactly what happened.
So Odessa, I'm going to go back to you, and then of course Eva with any closing thoughts, because I know we're at time, but building on what you were saying about trust. So our audience may not realize that this movie was shot around the pandemic, and Odessa, there was such critical scenes for you and the amazing Josh O'Connor to play, that you had to build trust. How do you build trust over Zoom? There's a lot of prep and chemistry, and then then there's the coming together of it. So I would love for you to just talk a little bit about that, adding that to your process.
I think Josh and I actually didn't even meet on Zoom before we did it. Like we just got to London. I got to London and we'd send each other like a few messages, and that was kind of it. And then we were in the rehearsal room together, because I think we technically weren't meant to be rehearsing, because like you could only fit so many people in a room legally before it became a gathering of too many people. I hope this doesn't get us in trouble.
Fine.
But I think that the trust, Josh is just such a professional that's what I trust. I think he's a brilliant actor. He's a wonderful person, and he is the consummate professional. And that's kind of all the trust you need, because when you can trust in professionalism and a kind heart, then there's not much else to be questioned. And both of us knew what had to happen in these scenes. Both of us knew that, we had to have chemistry, and we kind of just had to commit to it, because we weren't going to get any more time. It wasn't, we couldn't like push the film. We couldn't complain about it. It was the way that it is. And part of me is kind of glad for it, because I think that with that being so thrust into the midst of it, I think that him and I both just kind of like looked at each other one day. We went on a walk together. We were like, all right, this is just what it's got to be. And yeah, I'm just really thankful that he was kind of game, because I felt game and he was game, and you know, similarly with Chopin, like we had to cultivate the sense of 20 years of marriage, which is a big task as well. And that was also about trust. You know, I think that like with neither of these actors, these brilliant actors, I had to sit down with them and create like a backstory or anything. Like they would just both, it was alchemy. Like we were all just up for the challenge. And I believe that we did a good job, you know, but I think, yeah, I just think that professionalism shows in their performances. And, you know, I'm just, yeah, very proud to be in a movie with them.
Clearly. So Eva, final words. Do you want to build on what Odessa said before we have to close out?
I mean, I don't know. I had a blast with the actors. It was just one of those special experiences where I just could not say a bad word about any of them. And it's not just me being professional and, you know, doing promotion. They're just really fucking extraordinary, all of them. They're like incredible Stradivarius, you know, where you just have to like watch them play and sort of nudge a little bit here on the left and on the right, and just like thank the heavens that you've been given such talent to work with. And also, you know, it just gave me a few cold sweats at night. It was like, you know, like all this amazing cast, am I going to be able to pull it off? And when you have people at that level, you know, I know people have heard like horrible stories about like divas and such, but you also have the actors like Odessa, Josh, Colin, Olivia, who are always on time, always know the text, and just give you such a variety to work with that it's just, you know, extraordinary.
It certainly is the dream team of actors, you know, coming together. So I want to thank Eva Husson. I want to thank Odessa Young. And for our audience out there, please, on March 25th, if you're in New York and Los Angeles, flood to the theaters to see Mothering Sunday. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. And thank you so much for being with us. And we're so honored that we were able to have this talk with you today. And thank you again, Andrea Lust, as always.